Every sailor knows one simple rule about the ocean. Trust your charts. Trust your compass. Trust the lights that guide you through the darkness. Because out there, in the middle of the sea, those lights are sometimes the only thing standing between your ship and the rocks waiting beneath the waves. But what happens when you see a lighthouse? That doesn't exist on any map. What happens when the light guiding you to safety is actually guiding you somewhere else? Tonight's story begins in the North Atlantic, in waters that most sailors would rather avoid. Cold waters, heavy fog, and currents that can pull even large ships off course if the captain isn't careful. It was late autumn. The kind of night when the ocean feels restless, as if something beneath the surface is slowly waking up. The cargo ship Ardent Voyager had already been at sea for 11 days. The crew was tired, the weather had been worsening for hours, and the sky above them was turning darker by the minute. The wind started first. A low, distant howl that rolled across the ocean like a warning. At first, the crew barely noticed it. Storms were common out here. Every sailor aboard had seen worse. But the wind kept growing stronger. Soon the waves began to rise. The ship groaned as water slammed against the hull, and the deck lights swayed with the motion of the sea. Ropes creaked. Metal chains rattled. Somewhere below deck, loose cargo shifted with a dull, heavy thud. Captain Elias Ward stood on the bridge, watching the horizon through thick sheets of rain. Ward had spent nearly 30 years at sea. He was not a man who panicked easily. Storms were part of the job. But something about this storm felt wrong. The fog arrived suddenly. One moment the horizon was visible. The next moment the ocean simply disappeared. A wall of gray swallowed the ship from every direction. Even the bow lights barely reached 10 meters into the mist. "Visibility's dropping fast," the first officer said quietly. Ward didn't respond right away. He was staring at the radar. Nothing unusual. No ships. No land. Just open ocean. Exactly what the charts said there should be. Still, something bothered him. Then the lookout called from the deck. At first the voice came through the radio as static. Then the words became clear. "Captain, there's a light out here." Ward frowned. "A light?" he asked. "Yes sir," the lookout said. "Looks like a lighthouse." For a moment, the bridge went silent. That didn't make any sense. They were hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline. Ward immediately stepped outside onto the bridge wing. Rain hit his coat like needles as he looked out into the fog. At first he saw nothing. Just darkness and mist. Then, faintly, far in the distance, a beam of light cut through the fog. Slow. Rhythmic. Turning across the sea. A lighthouse. Ward stared at it for several seconds. His mind immediately began searching through every chart he had studied before the voyage. There should not be a lighthouse here. Not even a small one. The first officer joined him outside. "You seeing this?" he asked. Ward nodded slowly. The beam rotated again. Bright white light sweeping across the waves, then disappearing into the fog before returning seconds later. A perfectly functioning lighthouse. In the middle of nowhere. Maybe an offshore platform, the officer suggested. Ward shook his head. No platform would be out here. Another wave crashed against the hull, sending spray across the deck. The ship rolled slightly to port. Then the light swept across them again. Closer this time. And suddenly, the captain realized something that made his stomach tighten. The lighthouse wasn't stationary. It was moving. Not much. But enough to notice. The beam shifted position slightly each time it rotated. As if the tower itself was drifting through the fog. Ward felt a cold sensation crawl up the back of his neck. Lighthouses do not drift. They are built on rock. On islands. On solid ground. But this one was somewhere in the fog. And it was getting closer. Below deck, several sailors had already gathered near the windows, staring into the mist. The beam flashed again. One of the younger crew members spoke quietly. "Does anyone remember there being a lighthouse in this area?" No one answered. Because every man aboard knew the same thing. There wasn't. But the light kept turning. And the storm kept growing stronger. And somewhere out there in the fog, something was guiding them. The rain intensified as the ardent voyager pushed forward through the fog. The sea had turned restless, waves rising higher with each passing minute. The ship's hull groaned as it climbed and dropped over the dark water. On the bridge, Captain Elias Ward kept his eyes fixed on the distant beam. The lighthouse turned slowly. Again. And again. Each sweep of the light cut through the fog like a blade. But the longer Ward watched it, the more something about it unsettled him. Lighthouses had patterns. Every one of them. Mariners relied on those patterns to identify which lighthouse they were looking at. Some flashed twice. Others 3 times. Some had colored lights mixed with white. But this one had no clear rhythm. The beam rotated slowly, then paused. Then moved again. Sometimes it lingered on the same stretch of ocean for too long, almost as if it were searching. Ward leaned toward the radar screen again. Still nothing. No structure. No island. No platform. Just empty ocean. "That's impossible," the first officer muttered. Ward didn't answer. Instead he picked up the chart for their current position. He ran his finger across the grid coordinates, checking them carefully. They were exactly where they should be. Hundreds of miles from land. And yet the beam swept across the bridge windows again, bright enough to illuminate the rain streaking down the glass. Below deck the crew had started whispering. Sailors are practical men. Most of them don't believe in ghost stories. But long voyages and dark oceans have a way of making even the most skeptical crew uneasy. One of the deckhands, a broad-shouldered man named Collins, stood near the railing staring into the fog. "You see it move?" he asked quietly. Another sailor nodded. "Yeah. That ain't normal." A third sailor spoke up. "My grandfather used to talk about lights like that." Collins frowned. "What kind of lights?" The man hesitated. "The kind that lead ships somewhere they shouldn't go." A gust of wind howled across the deck, carrying sheets of rain with it. The lanterns along the railing swung wildly, casting long shadows across the soaked wooden planks. On the bridge the first officer suddenly leaned closer to the window. "Captain." Ward followed his gaze. The lighthouse beam swept across the water again. But now something else was visible for just a second. A dark shape beneath the surface. Something large. Something jagged. The captain immediately grabbed the radio. "Engine room, reduce speed." The response crackled back through the speaker. "Reducing speed, Captain." The engines shifted tone as the massive vessel began slowing slightly. Ward turned back toward the fog. The beam passed again. This time he saw it clearly. Rocks. Sharp black rocks jutting out of the ocean like the broken teeth of some enormous creature. They were barely visible beneath the waves. And they were much closer than they should have been. Ward's jaw tightened. "There are no reefs here," he said quietly. The first officer checked the chart again. None listed. But the rocks were there. And the lighthouse continued turning slowly beyond them. As if guiding ships toward the danger. Below deck the crew had begun to feel the ship change course slightly. Collins climbed the steps toward the bridge. When he stepped inside, his face was pale. "Captain, the men are getting nervous." Ward didn't look away from the window. "I can imagine." Collins hesitated before speaking again. "That light, it's been getting closer." Ward nodded slowly. "Yes." Collins swallowed. "But the strange thing is," he pointed out into the fog, "it doesn't look like it's built on land." Ward finally turned toward him. "What do you mean?" Collins shifted uncomfortably. "Every time the fog clears for a second, I can see the base of the tower. And there's water around it." The room went quiet. Ward turned back toward the fog just as the beam swept across the sea again. For a brief moment the mist thinned. And there it was. The lighthouse tower. Tall. Narrow. Ancient stone covered in dark streaks from years of storms. But Collins was right. The structure wasn't standing on an island. Waves crashed directly against its base. It stood alone in the open ocean. As if it had risen from the depths. The fog swallowed it again seconds later. The first officer slowly exhaled. "That should not be possible." Ward said nothing. Because something else had just occurred to him. If the tower truly stood alone in the water, then something far worse must be hidden beneath the surface. And as if the ocean itself had heard that thought, the ship suddenly lurched violently. A grinding sound echoed through the hull. Metal screamed against stone. The crew grabbed onto railings as the deck tilted sharply. "Rocks," someone shouted. Ward slammed his hand onto the engine controls. Full stop. The engines roared as the massive propellers fought against the raging sea. For several seconds the entire ship shuddered as waves pushed it sideways. Then finally, the grinding stopped. The ardent Voyager drifted just meters away from a field of jagged rocks hidden beneath the water. On the bridge every man stood frozen. If they had been moving just a little faster, the hull would have been torn open. The ship would already be sinking. Ward slowly looked back toward the fog. The lighthouse beam turned once more. And for the first time since the storm began, it seemed to be pointing directly at them. Almost as if it were watching. Almost as if it were disappointed they had not crashed. Below deck one of the sailors whispered something that made the others fall silent. "Look around." They turned toward the dark water beyond the rocks. At first they saw nothing. Then the lightning flashed across the sky. For a split second the ocean lit up. And suddenly the crew understood something terrifying. They were not the first ship to find this place. Broken pieces of wood floated between the rocks. Splintered beams. Shattered hull fragments. Rusting chains. And half-submerged remains of ships that had not been as lucky as the ardent Voyager. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Ships that had followed the same light. Ships that had trusted the lighthouse. Ships that had never made it back. And somewhere out there in the fog, the beam continued turning slowly. Patiently. As if waiting for the next vessel to appear out of the darkness. For several long seconds no one spoke. The only sounds were the wind screaming through the rigging and the heavy breathing of the men on the bridge. Captain Ward stared out into the darkness where the lighthouse beam continued to rotate through the fog. Slow. Patient. Unchanging. The first officer finally broke the silence. "Captain, if we had been moving just a little faster." Ward nodded without turning. "We'd already be on the bottom." Another wave crashed against the rocks nearby, sending white spray high into the air. The sea around them looked violent and chaotic, but what unsettled Ward the most was something else. The lighthouse had not stopped turning. Even after the ship nearly wrecked. Even after they had slowed. The beam still swept across the ocean in that same strange rhythm. As if the light did not care whether ships survived or not. Below deck the crew had begun moving around nervously. Word had spread quickly about the rocks and the wreckage surrounding them. Sailors gathered near the portholes, trying to see through the rain. Every few seconds lightning flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating the jagged graveyard surrounding the ship. Pieces of broken masts. Fragments of hulls. Floating debris. And something else. One of the younger sailors, a quiet man named Ortega, leaned closer to the glass. "Do you see that?" The man beside him squinted into the darkness. "See what?" Ortega pointed. "There, between the rocks." Another flash of lightning lit the ocean. For a brief moment the water glowed pale silver. And in that instant they saw it. A large shape drifting slowly between the wreckage. At first it looked like another broken piece of ship. But then the shape turned. And they realized it was not wood. It was metal. A bell. An old ship's bell, still attached to a section of rusted railing, drifting quietly in the current. And somehow, it was ringing. Not loudly. Just a faint, hollow sound carried by the wind. A slow, lonely chime. One of the sailors stepped back from the window. "That thing shouldn't be ringing." The others stared at the drifting bell as it rocked gently in the waves. Each movement produced another soft metallic note. Chime. 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 The sound drifted across the water like a warning from the past. On the bridge Collins suddenly spoke again. "Captain, look." Ward followed his gaze. The lighthouse beam had changed. Before, it had been sweeping across the ocean in a wide arc. Now it had stopped rotating. The beam had frozen in place. And it was pointing directly at the ardent Voyager. The bright white light cut through the fog and illuminated the ship from bow to stern. Every man on deck turned toward it. The light felt wrong. Too steady. Too focused. As if something inside the tower had finally found what it was looking for. The first officer spoke quietly. "Why did it stop?" Ward didn't answer. "Because something else was happening." The fog around the lighthouse had begun to thin. Very slowly. Almost deliberately. The shape of the tower emerged once more. Tall. Dark. Ancient. But now they could see more of it. The base of the structure was surrounded by violent waves crashing against stone. But there was no island. No visible foundation. Just the tower itself rising out of the ocean. And then another detail became visible. Something moving near the top. At first Ward thought it was just shadow. Then lightning flashed again. For half a second the entire tower was illuminated. And every man on the bridge saw it. A figure. Standing in the lantern room. Perfectly still. Watching the ship. Collins felt his throat tighten. "Captain." Ward didn't move. The figure did not look like a lighthouse keeper. Its shape was wrong. Too thin. Too tall. Its arms hung strangely at its sides. And even from this distance, something about the way it stood felt deeply unnatural. The beam of light still pointed directly at them. As if the figure inside the tower had aimed it. Below deck the crew had begun hearing the bell outside. The slow ringing continued through the storm. Chime. 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 Ortega suddenly leaned forward again. "Wait." The others looked at him. "What?" He pointed toward the water. "The wreckage, it's moving." At first the men thought it was just the waves pushing the debris around. But then they noticed something strange. The broken pieces of ships were drifting in the same direction. Toward the rocks. Toward the base of the lighthouse. The current around the tower seemed to be pulling everything inward. Slowly. Relentlessly. One of the sailors whispered something under his breath. "That place is a trap." Up on the bridge, Ward finally spoke again. "Engines ahead." "Slow." The first officer looked at him in surprise. "You want to move closer?" Ward shook his head. "We're getting out of here." The engines rumbled to life once more. Slowly the massive ship began turning away from the rocks. The crew watched the lighthouse carefully as the bow shifted. For a moment nothing happened. Then suddenly the beam moved again. The light swept violently across the water. Once. Twice. As if searching. Then it locked onto the ship again. Brighter than before. More intense. Collins felt a cold chill run through his body. "It doesn't want us to leave." The wind picked up even more. Sheets of rain began to lash against the deck. The sailors gripped ropes and railings, their knuckles white. Each lightning flash revealed glimpses of the horrific shapes moving in the water, remnants of doomed crews, dragged toward the unnatural lighthouse, each wave like a hand pulling them down. And then, almost imperceptibly, a sound reached the bridge. At first, it was faint, almost drowned out by the storm, a slow, metallic chime, ringing from somewhere beneath the waves. One by one, the men realized it was coming from the wreckage itself. The ship's bell, or what remained of it, ringing out in the fog, each note a warning, a lament, a signal of doom. Ward's jaw tightened. "Steady. Keep us moving." The beam shifted slightly. The figure in the lantern room raised an arm, pointing, not at them, but somewhere beyond the current horizon. The motion was deliberate, commanding, almost sentient. The crew's fear escalated. They had crossed paths with something far older than the sea itself, and they had survived only by the narrowest margin. But the captain knew this wasn't over. The light would not let them go that easily. The fog, the wreckage, the figure, all of it waited for the next mistake, the slightest lapse in vigilance. Every sailor aboard felt it. The ocean itself was alive with a consciousness, using the phantom lighthouse as a lure, and they were still within its gaze. Collins muttered, almost to himself, "I've never seen anything like this, never." The first officer looked at him, wide-eyed. "And we may never leave this place, not alive." Ward kept his eyes on the light. He didn't reply. No words could convey what they were facing. The ardent Voyager surged forward, the engine straining against the waves, but even at full speed, the lighthouse's beam followed, unyielding, patient, unstoppable. Somewhere deep in the fog, beyond sight, other wrecked ships waited. Other crews had failed. Their remnants drifted eternally, and the ghostly light had claimed them all. And tonight, the ardent Voyager would have to prove itself stronger, faster, and luckier than all who had come before. Because the lighthouse was not merely a structure. It was a predator. And it had its eyes set firmly on the living. The storm raged around them, but despite the chaos, Captain Ward noticed something else. A strange calm in the water appeared directly beneath the beam of the lighthouse. The waves, which had been relentless and violent, suddenly parted as if a giant hand had pushed them aside. The crew began whispering to each other, their fear growing with each passing moment. The ocean seemed to move independently, almost alive, responding to the light. Every sailor aboard the ship felt it. Something was waiting beneath the surface, something ancient and patient. Collins grabbed the railing and stared into the churning water. "It's like it's watching us," he muttered. His voice trembled. Ward didn't reply. He simply adjusted the ship's course slightly, steering cautiously. Every instinct told him to retreat, yet a deeper, gnawing curiosity, terrifying as it was, pushed him forward. Lightning flashed again, revealing more of the lighthouse. Its base remained hidden, but something darker than stone seemed to shift inside the fog around it. For a brief moment, Ward thought he saw movement near the tower's foundation, perhaps a shadow or a creature lurking, barely visible. Then the sound started. A low, mournful hum carried across the waves, under the storm's roar. The sailors froze. It wasn't wind or water, it was singing. Not words, just tones, echoing and vibrating in the chest, deep and ancient. The first officer gripped the wheel, pale-faced. "Captain, do you hear that?" Ward nodded slowly. "Yes. It's coming from the lighthouse, from below it." The sailors began to panic, voices rising. "We're not supposed to be here." "It's a trap," one shouted. Others clutched each other, silent tears mixing with rain on their faces. Suddenly, a wave slammed over the deck, sending ropes and crates tumbling. A lantern broke, spilling its pale light onto the wet wood. For a moment, everything was illuminated. And in that flash, the crew saw it clearly. Floating near the surface, moving with unnatural grace, were pieces of wreckage. Ward squinted through the driving rain. Dozens of floating shapes circled the ship, each piece of debris twisting into shapes resembling men and women, faces frozen in expressions of terror. The water around them rippled unnaturally, as if some force beneath it was moving deliberately. A cold chill ran through Ward. He knew instinctively, this was not just a lighthouse. It was a sentinel. A predator. It had been collecting ships for centuries, perhaps millennia, waiting for sailors to trust the light. Another flash of lightning revealed the figure in the lantern room. It moved again, deliberately, almost arrogantly, as if aware of their fear. Ward could see its elongated shadow stretch along the tower. The arm raised again, pointing toward the ardent voyager. "Captain," the first officer breathed, voice shaking. "It's commanding the ocean. Look at the waves, they're forming a path toward the tower." Ward's heart raced. He realized the storm wasn't random. The fog, the waves, the wreckage, they were all being manipulated. The lighthouse beam wasn't a warning, it was a lure. A trap. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. Something massive had brushed against the hull beneath the water. The hull groaned and shuddered as if the ocean itself were pushing against them. The sailors screamed, clutching anything solid on deck. Collins fell to his knees, gripping a railing. "It's beneath us." Ward gritted his teeth. "Steady. Keep her moving forward." Lightning illuminated the sea for an instant. For a split second, the crew saw dozens of ghostly shapes rising from the water, remnants of wrecked ships and their crews, faces pale and eyes hollow, drifting slowly toward the phantom lighthouse. Some of them seemed to reach upward, toward the beam, as if drawn to the light. Ortega staggered back. "They're alive. They're not dead yet." Ward swallowed hard. He had faced storms, rogue waves, even pirates, but nothing like this. This was something older, something unnatural. The lighthouse beam pulsed again, faster this time. Each pulse made the water around the ship glow faintly. The wreckage moved in time with it, circling the vessel like predators stalking prey. Collins whispered, "We're next. It wants us next." Ward's hands tightened on the controls. He knew the only chance of survival was to outmaneuver it, but how do you outrun something that controls both sea and storm? The ardent voyager pitched violently as a massive wave struck the starboard side. The sailors braced, gripping whatever they could. Suddenly, a new sound reached them, a faint, hollow chanting, barely audible over the storm. The tones were low and haunting, almost melodic. Ward recognized it immediately from old sailors' tales, the song of the drowned, summoned by the lighthouse. The chanting grew louder, weaving through the wind, wrapping around the ship like invisible chains. The sailors clutched their heads, trying to block it out. Some fell to their knees, rocking in terror. "Captain, it's calling us," the first officer cried. "It's trying to lure us." Ward's jaw tightened. Do not respond. Keep moving forward. The ship surged through the waves. Every now and then, lightning revealed the shapes in the water. The spectral sailors seemed to float just beneath the surface, pale hands reaching upward toward the beam. Each flash illuminated their horror-stricken faces, eyes wide and mouths open in silent screams. The lighthouse itself seemed to grow taller with every pulse of its light. The figure in the lantern room stretched, elongated unnaturally, its arms still pointing at them. Ward noticed now something even more terrifying: the tower's foundation was no longer visible at all. The stone base had vanished beneath the fog and waves, leaving the impression that the structure was suspended, floating, anchored by nothing. Collins gritted his teeth. It's impossible. Ward didn't answer. He focused on the path through the waves, knowing each second counted. One wrong move, one slip, and they'd join the thousands of wrecked ships scattered around the phantom lighthouse. The storm began to shift strangely. The wind howled in patterns that didn't make sense. The waves twisted and curved as if shaping themselves around the ardent Voyager, guiding it toward the lighthouse even as the captain fought the helm. Another wave crashed over the deck, sweeping away crates and ropes. The bell from the wreckage rang again, hollow and echoing, sending shivers down the spine of every sailor. Ward looked toward the lantern room. The figure raised both arms now. The light flashed unnaturally bright, almost blinding. In that flash, Ward saw something else moving inside the fog near the base of the tower, a massive, shadowy shape beneath the water, darker than night, moving deliberately toward them. The pulse of the lighthouse's beam quickened. The water churned violently around the ship. The storm intensified, as though the ocean itself had risen against them. And somewhere deep beneath the waves, the ghosts of the lighthouse's previous victims began to stir, drifting toward the surface in unison, drawn to the light. The ardent Voyager surged forward through the angry sea, yet the storm seemed alive, twisting around the ship like it had a will of its own. Every wave was sharper, taller, and heavier than the last. The sailors clung to whatever they could as the deck pitched violently. Rain hammered down, stinging like needles, but that was nothing compared to the cold that had begun to seep into their bones, the unnatural chill that came from the lighthouse itself. Collins stumbled, gripping a railing. "Captain, look at the water." Ward followed his gaze. Lightning flashed, illuminating the waves for a brief second. The wreckage circling the tower had multiplied. Pieces of ships, masts, and hulls had coalesced into forms that looked like sailors frozen in mid-motion, floating and drifting, but moving in a strange, purposeful way, as if alive. Their pale faces stared blankly upward, eyes empty, mouths open in eternal screams. Ortega, shaking, whispered, "They're coming toward us. They're trying to grab the ship." Ward tightened his grip on the wheel. "Keep her steady. Don't panic." But panic had already set in below deck. The sailors scrambled for cover, some vomiting, some sobbing quietly. The bell continued its slow, hollow toll from somewhere beneath the waves, each chime resonating through the hull like a heartbeat of doom. The lighthouse's beam pulsed faster now, brighter, cutting through the fog with surgical precision. The figure in the lantern room had grown taller, its shadow stretching across the tower like a living thing. The arm that had been pointing now waved slowly, almost beckoning, as if inviting the ardent Voyager closer. Ward swallowed hard. It's alive, somehow. That light, it's controlling everything, the water, the storm, the wreckage. The storm shifted again. Waves began to spiral around the ship, almost like a vortex forming beneath the lighthouse. The vessel tilted dangerously. A massive swell hit the port side, sending crates and debris flying. The sailors screamed, their voices swallowed by the wind. "Brace yourselves!" Ward shouted. "Full throttle! Away from it!" The engines roared in response, but the water beneath them seemed to resist. The currents twisted, and the ardent voyager's bow veered toward the center of the wreckage. The pulsing light of the lighthouse highlighted ghostly figures rising from the water, arms outstretched. Collins shouted, "We're caught. It's pulling us in." Ortega trembled. "It wants us like the others." The beam swept across the ship again, freezing them in place. The pale glow of the light revealed hundreds of shapes beneath the waves, drifting in slow, deliberate motion. Remnants of ships, sailors, and the unidentifiable, all circling the tower, drawn inexorably to the beacon. Ward clenched his jaw. He had faced storms, rogue waves, and enemy ships, but nothing prepared him for an ocean that seemed alive, guided by a sentient lighthouse. Suddenly, the pulsing light became blinding. The figure in the lantern room lifted both arms, and the wind shifted violently, twisting ropes and hurling rain against the windows. The ship lurched sharply, water crashing over the deck. Below deck, sailors screamed, some crawling for safety, some frozen with terror. A massive shadow appeared beneath the surface. Darker than the stormy night, it rose slowly, moving with deliberate purpose. The crew on the bridge could see the outline vaguely in the faint flashes of lightning. It was enormous, too large for any normal sea creature. Its shape was indistinct, yet there was no mistaking the intelligence in its movements. Collins' voice shook. "It's beneath us. It's watching. Waiting." Ward didn't respond. He kept the ship moving, knowing that a single mistake would doom them. The lighthouse's pulse increased again, faster now, almost like a heartbeat. With each beat, the shadows in the water seemed to rise higher, closer to the ship. "Captain," the first officer muttered, pale-faced, "do you see the wreckage? It's moving on its own now. The currents, they're unnatural." "Yes," Ward said quietly. "And the light is controlling it. Every ship wrecked here, it didn't happen by chance. The lighthouse, it hunts. It collects." The bell from the wreckage tolled again. Its hollow tone seemed to resonate with the pulsing light, a sinister rhythm that echoed through the fog and the storm. The figures in the water responded to it, drifting closer, their ghostly forms stretching upward, reaching for the ship as if guided by the unseen force. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating the lantern room. The figure had leaned over the edge, staring directly at the ardent voyager. Its shadow stretched across the water, merging with the forms below. The beam of light focused intensely on the ship, cutting through the fog like a blade of pure white fire. Ward felt the cold fear settle deep in his chest. He knew they were being tested. That the lighthouse wasn't just a beacon, it was alive, aware, and patient. It had watched centuries of sailors die, and now it was waiting to see if the ardent voyager would join them. The crew on the bridge remained silent, eyes glued to the beam. The storm around them roared, yet the water near the lighthouse stayed unnaturally still, almost like a calm within the chaos. Shapes beneath the surface drifted slowly, rhythmically, in time with the pulsing light, as if dancing to a song only the lighthouse could play. "Captain," Collins whispered, voice barely audible, "do you think any ship ever leaves this place?" Ward didn't answer. He only gripped the wheel tighter. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, yet some part of him, horrifyingly curious, knew that the lighthouse would not release them easily. Lightning split the sky again, revealing the shadowy figures beneath the waves, the twisted wreckage, and the impossibly tall tower. Its light was relentless. The figure in the lantern room raised both arms now, as if conducting the storm and the sea itself. The water around the tower rippled unnaturally, pulling at the ardent voyager with invisible hands, testing their strength, their resolve, their very will to survive. The bell tolled again, slow and hollow. And in the distance, deep beneath the waves, something massive stirred, unseen but powerful, circling, waiting for the ship to falter. The ardent voyager pitched violently as the storm raged. Rain slammed against the deck like thousands of needles. Every wave threatened to pull them under, but Captain Ward refused to take his eyes off the phantom lighthouse. The beam was no longer just a light, it was a presence. Every rotation, every pulse of brilliance seemed deliberate, almost aware. The shadows beneath the water twisted unnaturally, forming vague shapes of sailors, twisting and reaching, frozen in a silent scream. Ortega stumbled against the railing. "Captain, it's moving faster now. The wreckage, the ghosts, they're drifting toward us." Collins shivered. "I've never seen water behave like this. It's alive." Ward said nothing. Every second counted. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down from the lighthouse above. Every ship that had dared approach this place had vanished, leaving nothing but debris. And now the ardent Voyager was being tested. The figure in the lantern room moved again. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long, merging with the waves and wreckage below. Ward's stomach clenched. Its arm pointed directly at the ship, commanding the ocean itself. The lighthouse pulsed faster, brighter, each pulse sending ripples through the water, shaping the waves into impossible forms. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the ocean for a fleeting second. Ward could see the shapes beneath, twisted remnants of ships, skeletons of sailors, and pieces of wood that shifted as if alive. Their hands reached toward the ardent Voyager, drawn by the pulsing beam. Collins whispered, his voice trembling, "It wants us. We're the next." Ward's heart pounded. He adjusted the helm, steering carefully, but the currents fought them, tugging them toward the phantom tower. The storm roared louder, waves slamming the hull with unrelenting force. Then the unthinkable happened. A massive shadow rose from the depths near the lighthouse. It moved with deliberate, intelligent motion. Not a whale, not a shark, something older than memory, vast, and dark, circling the tower. Its size dwarfed the ship. The crew froze, staring in horror as the creature slid beneath the wreckage, herding the debris like a shepherd driving sheep. Ortega gasped. "Captain, it's guiding them." Ward swallowed hard. "And it's guiding us, too. Keep her steady." The bell tolled again, echoing across the waves. Its sound resonated with the pulsing light, creating a rhythm that seemed to bind the ship, the waves, and the storm together. Every man on deck felt the vibration in his chest. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to resist. The lighthouse pulsed brighter, faster, as the shadow beneath the waves circled closer. The figure in the lantern room raised both arms, and for a terrifying moment, it felt as if the beam itself had a mind, directing the currents, the wreckage, the storm, and the spectral forms beneath the surface. Collins clutched Ward's arm. "Captain, it's too powerful. We can't outrun it." Ward gritted his teeth. "We have to try. If we falter, we die." The ardent Voyager surged forward. The storm whipped even harder. Waves rose impossibly high, crashing over the deck. The ghostly shapes of wrecked sailors drifted ever closer, their hollow eyes fixed on the living crew. Lightning flashed again. For an instant, the figure in the lantern room was illuminated fully, impossibly tall, thin, skeletal, yet somehow commanding. Its presence was suffocating, as though it could reach across the fog and the waves to grasp the living. Another massive wave slammed into the side of the ship. The deck tilted violently. Crates and equipment flew across the wet planks. Below deck, sailors screamed and clung to anything stable, their eyes wide with fear. Ward's mind raced. He could feel the pull beneath the hull, the shadowed entity beneath the water, guiding the wreckage, manipulating the waves. The lighthouse's beam pulsed again, faster, brighter, synchronizing with the toll of the bell. Suddenly, the water beneath the ship erupted. Dark shapes surged upward, colliding with floating wreckage. The hollow forms of the dead reached toward the ardent Voyager, hands grasping for the living. Collins shouted in terror, swinging a rope at them, but the waves carried nothing but their echoes. The lighthouse's light focused directly on the ship, blinding and commanding all it illuminated. The pulsing intensified, each beat sending ripples of dread through the air, the water, the very hearts of the crew. The shadow beneath the waves circled faster, herding the ghostly wreckage like a predator circling its prey. Ward's eyes locked on the figure in the lantern room. It raised both arms, the storm itself seeming to bend to its will. The ship pitched violently again, almost tipping, as if the ocean was testing its strength, its resolve, its will to survive. Below deck, the sailors screamed, some in prayer, some in panic. The bell tolled again, hollow and echoing, vibrating through the ship's timbers, as if summoning them toward their doom. Ward took a deep breath. He knew that survival would require every ounce of skill, courage, and cunning he possessed. One false move, one miscalculation, and the ardent voyager would join the ghostly fleet beneath the lighthouse, trapped forever in the rhythm of its pulse, the light, and the storm. The lighthouse pulsed once more, brighter than ever. The figure in the lantern room stood motionless, its gaze fixed on the ardent voyager. The shadow beneath the waves circled tighter. The wreckage of centuries-long dead ships drifted closer, synchronized with the blinding beam. And the storm had become a single entity, moving in time with the lighthouse, pushing, pulling, testing, waiting. Every sailor on deck felt it. The ardent voyager had entered the domain of something older than memory, older than the sea itself, and the only way out was to survive the night. The ardent voyager shuddered as another colossal wave slammed against its hull. Rain poured like sheets of needles, stinging skin, flooding the deck. The wind screamed like a living creature, and every creak of the ship sounded unnaturally loud in the storm. The sailors clung desperately to whatever they could find, their faces pale, eyes wide with terror. Captain Ward stood on the bridge, gripping the wheel, his knuckles white. The lighthouse tower loomed through the fog, impossibly tall, impossibly ancient. Its light pulsed again, faster, brighter, cutting through the storm with almost sentient precision. Every sailor on board could feel it, not as a mere light, but as a presence that sought them, studied them, toyed with them. Collins whispered hoarsely, "Captain, look at the water." Lightning revealed the depths. The wreckage circling the lighthouse had multiplied and changed. Twisted, pale forms of long-dead sailors floated alongside broken hulls, their faces frozen in silent screams, arms outstretched as if trying to claw their way back to life. The water around them pulsed unnaturally, reacting to the lighthouse beam like a living organism. Ortega trembled, voice barely audible, "It's guiding them, the dead, they're moving on their own." Ward's jaw tightened. He had seen storms, rogue waves, even pirates, but never an ocean that obeyed the will of a single structure. This lighthouse was not merely a building. It was a predator, commanding the elements, collecting the dead, testing the living. A massive shadow appeared beneath the waves. Larger than any whale, darker than the night itself, it glided through the water with deliberate, intelligent motion. The sailors on deck froze, staring in horror. The shadow moved like it had purpose, herding the spectral wreckage toward the ardent voyager. Collins gripped the wheel. "Captain, it's circling us. We can't outrun it." Ward tightened his grip. "Then we fight the currents. Don't falter. Keep moving." The storm intensified. Waves towered above the deck, crashing violently. The ship lurched and creaked under the pressure. Ghostly forms rose higher from the water, some pale sailors, others indistinct humanoid shapes, reaching toward the living crew. The bell from the wreckage tolled again, each hollow clang vibrating through the ship's timbers, synchronized with the lighthouse's pulse. Lightning flashed. For a brief instant, the figure in the lantern room was fully visible, impossibly tall, skeletal, commanding. Its arms lifted as if conducting the ocean itself. The pulsing light grew blinding, every rotation cutting through the fog like a knife. Collins whispered, "It's alive. Everything here is alive, the lighthouse, the water, even the wreckage." Ward didn't reply. His eyes never left the tower. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down, countless sailors who had trusted the light and were now trapped forever beneath it. And now the ardent voyager was its latest prey. A wave slammed the deck again, sweeping over the rails, throwing sailors off balance. The water around them glowed faintly in time with the pulsing beam. Shapes beneath the surface twisted, formed, and reformed like a living graveyard. The dead seemed to anticipate the ship's movements, circling closer with each heartbeat of the lighthouse. Ortega muttered, "It's calling us to join them." The captain gritted his teeth. "We won't give it that satisfaction. Steady, men. Steady." The lighthouse's pulse quickened, and the shadow beneath the waves surged. Waves rose unnaturally, almost forming walls around the ship, trying to funnel them toward the tower. The wreckage below followed suit, floating in impossible patterns, twisting like some dark choreography dictated by the light. The figure in the lantern room raised both arms, and the storm responded as if alive. Winds shifted violently, ropes lashed across the deck, rain blinded the sailors, yet the ardent voyager pressed onward. The bell tolled again. Hollow. Slow. Resonant. Each chime seemed to reach through the fog and the storm, binding the ship and crew to the lighthouse's will. Collins gasped, voice trembling, "Captain, it's shaping the storm itself. Every wave, every gust of wind, it's controlling them." Ward swallowed hard. "Then we will fight it. We survive this night, no matter what it takes." Another flash of lightning revealed the shadow beneath the waves, enormous, impossible, ancient. It twisted in the water, guiding wreckage and spectral sailors closer to the ship. The dead moved as one, circling, testing, reaching. And through it all, the lighthouse pulsed, always pulsed, a heartbeat in the storm that could crush their minds. The storm seemed to pause for a moment. The air was thick, heavy, charged with the unholy presence of the lighthouse. Then, slowly, the fog parted just enough to reveal the tower's impossible base, jagged black rocks, rising like broken teeth from the ocean. Around them, countless wrecked ships swirled in the unnatural current, all drawn inexorably toward the tower, as if the lighthouse had claimed dominion over them. Ward's eyes narrowed. He could feel it now. The lighthouse, the storm, the water, they were all one. And they wanted him, his crew, his ship. The ardent voyager surged forward, engines roaring, fighting against the invisible pull of the ocean. Every sailor braced for the impossible. Each pulse of the lighthouse made the waves rise higher, the shadows beneath swirl faster, the storm more violent. And somewhere deep, beneath the crashing waves, the massive shadow circled tighter. Its movement synchronized perfectly with the lighthouse's pulse. Ward realized with horror that it was hurting them, just as it had hurted the countless ships before them. The bell tolled again, each hollow note echoing through the storm, through the vessel, through the very souls of the crew. The pulse of the lighthouse quickened to a fevered beat. The water boiled with ghostly forms, all circling, all drawn to the beam. Ward swallowed. "We survive this, or we join them." The ardent voyager pitched violently, waves towering, wind screaming, rain blinding, the dead circling. And the lighthouse waited. Patient. Unchanging. Eternal. The ardent voyager trembled under the force of the storm. Waves slammed against the hull like massive fists. Rain tore across the deck in sheets, blinding and relentless. The wind shrieked, carrying a faint, mournful wail that seemed almost human. Every sailor on deck felt it, the air itself was alive, sentient, and hostile. Captain Ward's eyes never left the lighthouse. It pulsed now with a rhythm that seemed alive, like a heartbeat, throbbing in time with the storm and the ocean itself. The figure in the lantern room stood motionless, skeletal and impossibly tall, its shadow stretching across the fog and water like a dark arm reaching toward them. "Captain," Collins whispered, voice shaking, the shadow, it's rising from the water, it's enormous. Ward swallowed hard. He could barely make out the shape in the lightning flashes, a massive, undulating silhouette beneath the waves, circling the ship. Something older than the ocean itself, moving deliberately, controlling the wreckage and the spectral sailors drifting around the tower. Ortega clutched the railing, pale and trembling. It's hurting us, like prey. Ward's jaw tightened. We stay steady. Keep moving forward. Do not falter. Lightning revealed more of the horrors below the water, twisted forms of sailors, shattered hulls, masts, and wreckage, all moving with deliberate purpose, circling the ardent voyager, guided by the lighthouse. Their faces were frozen in silent screams, their arms reaching for the living. Each pulse of the lighthouse sent ripples through the water, guiding them closer. Collins gasped. It's alive, the dead, the lighthouse, everything. The pulsing of the light intensified. The figure in the lantern room raised both arms, and the storm obeyed, twisting the waves, wind, and debris in unnatural patterns. The ardent voyager pitched violently, nearly tipping in the mountainous waves. The bell tolled from the wreckage again, hollow and resonant, echoing through the ship, through the water, through the crew's very bones. Each chime seemed to bind the ship and sailors to the lighthouse, compelling them forward, closer to the tower. Ward gritted his teeth. Hold her steady. We survive this night, or we die trying. Below deck, sailors screamed, prayed, and clung desperately to anything solid. The waves broke over the deck, sweeping away crates and equipment. The storm pressed from all sides, yet the lighthouse pulsed relentlessly, unyielding, commanding the ocean, the dead, and the living alike. The shadow beneath the waves moved faster now, circling tighter, hurting the ghostly wreckage, guiding the ardent voyager as if it were a predator guiding prey toward its lair. The water itself roiled unnaturally, twisting around the hull in impossible patterns. Another flash of lightning illuminated the lantern room. The figure was fully visible, impossibly thin, impossibly tall, watching them with a presence that chilled every living soul on the ship. The pulse of the lighthouse synced with the bell below, creating a rhythm that seemed to control the storm, the sea, and the hearts of the sailors. Collins whispered hoarsely, "It's testing us, every ship before us failed. They're watching." Ward's eyes narrowed. Then we survive. We keep moving. No mistakes. The ardent voyager surged forward, engines roaring against the unnatural pull of the ocean. Ghostly figures rose higher from the wreckage, hands outstretched, faces twisted in silent screams. The storm seemed alive, every gust of wind, every towering wave controlled by the lighthouse and the shadow beneath the waves. The pulse of the light quickened, faster and brighter, cutting through the fog with a blade of white fire. The ghostly forms of sailors reached for the living crew, circling tighter, herded by the unseen force below. Ward could feel it in his bones, the lighthouse, the storm, the ocean, the wreckage, all one entity, testing them, pushing them toward a decision. Survival or death. Resistance or surrender. The bell tolled again. Hollow, slow, echoing, binding them to the tower's will. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the shadow beneath the water, enormous, ancient, moving with deliberate intelligence. The wreckage formed a swirling vortex, circling the ardent voyager, and the ghostly sailors followed, drawn inexorably toward the beam. Ortega whispered in terror, "It wants us, all of us." Ward swallowed, voice steady despite the fear. "We survive, or we die trying. Stay at your posts." The storm raged. The lighthouse pulsed. The shadow circled. The wreckage swirled. And the ardent voyager fought to stay afloat, caught in the eye of a supernatural force older than the sea itself. The ardent voyager shuddered violently as another monstrous wave slammed the hull. Rain cut across the deck like icy blades, drenching every man aboard. The wind shrieked as if alive, carrying a faint, tortured wail that seemed to come from the depths themselves. Every creak of the ship sounded louder than it should, echoing like a voice from some forgotten past. Captain Ward's eyes were locked on the lighthouse. Its light pulsed like a heartbeat, faster, brighter, almost sentient. Each rotation seemed deliberate, tracking the ship with a precision that terrified even the most seasoned sailors. The figure in the lantern room stood impossibly tall and skeletal, its shadow stretching across the waves, merging with the fog, and somehow, commanding the storm. Collins gripped the railing, trembling. "Captain, look at the water." Lightning flashed, revealing the horror beneath, dozens of ghostly forms, twisted sailors, broken hulls, and masts, moving in impossible, purposeful patterns. The water pulsed unnaturally, circling the ship in sync with the lighthouse's heartbeat. Ortega whispered, "It's alive. All of it, it's guiding the dead." Ward didn't respond. His hands tightened on the wheel. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the countless sailors who had trusted the light and vanished forever. And now, the ardent Voyager was its latest prey. The shadow beneath the waves rose. Massive, ancient, deliberate, it moved like it had intelligence, herding the ghostly wreckage toward the ship. The crew froze, unable to look away as the spectral sailors reached upward, hollow-eyed, arms outstretched, silent screams etched on their pale faces. The lighthouse pulsed faster. Its light cut through the fog like a blade. The figure in the lantern room raised both arms, and the storm obeyed, twisting waves and wind into unnatural patterns. The ardent Voyager pitched violently, threatening to capsize. Collins gasped, "It's shaping the storm itself. The water, the wind, even the wreckage." Ward's jaw tightened. "We survive this, or we die trying." Another monstrous wave struck, sweeping crates and ropes off the deck. The sailors screamed, clinging to the rails, praying, sobbing. The bell from the wreckage tolled hollow and slow, resonating through the ship, syncing perfectly with the lighthouse's pulse. Each toll seemed to tug at their very souls, binding them to the tower's will. The shadow beneath the waves circled faster. The wreckage swirled, forming a living vortex around the ardent Voyager. The ghostly sailors drifted closer, reaching, grasping, drawn by the light. The storm itself seemed to move with intelligence, trying to force the ship toward the tower. Ward could feel it, the lighthouse, the storm, the water, the wreckage, all one entity, ancient and patient, testing their resolve. Every man aboard knew instinctively that a single mistake would doom them to join the spectral fleet beneath the phantom light. Lightning flashed again, revealing the figure in the lantern room. Its shadow stretched impossibly across the deck and the water, and its gaze pierced the storm, focusing on them like a predator on prey. The pulse of the light quickened, brighter, blinding. The dead beneath the waves rose higher, arms outstretched, circling tighter, guided by the force beneath the water. Collins whispered, voice shaking, "Captain, it wants us, it's hurting us, like all the others." Ward swallowed hard. "We will not falter. We survive. Steady, men. Hold your posts." The ardent Voyager surged forward, engines straining, hull creaking under the monstrous pressure of waves and storm. The shadow beneath the water moved with impossible speed, herding the wreckage closer. Lightning split the sky, revealing hundreds of ghostly forms circling in a perfect, horrifying dance. The bell tolled again. Hollow. Echoing. Each strike of the bell and pulse of the lighthouse bound the ship, the crew, and the storm together. The crew could feel it in their bones. The lighthouse had dominion over the ocean itself, over the dead, and over them. The fog thickened. Visibility dropped to nothing. Only the pulse of the lighthouse and the ghostly forms moving beneath the waves guided the crew's fear and focus. Every heartbeat, every breath felt synchronized with the rhythm of the lighthouse, a supernatural force older than memory, older than the sea itself. The ardent Voyager pitched again. Another wave crashed violently over the deck, sweeping sailors off their feet. The spectral hands of the dead seemed to reach even higher, as if trying to pull the living down. The shadow beneath the waves twisted, moving with deliberate intelligence, herding the ardent voyager closer to the tower's impossible base. Ward gritted his teeth. "Hold on. Do not falter. We survive this night, or we die trying." And the lighthouse pulsed. Faster. Brighter. Unyielding. Eternal. The storm seemed to grow even stronger, as if it had fed on their fear. Waves rose impossibly high, crashing over the deck with relentless fury. Rain lashed against the crew like thousands of icy needles, and the wind carried the faint, tortured wail of the dead. Every sailor clung desperately to whatever solid surface they could find, but even that offered no comfort. Captain Ward's eyes were locked on the lighthouse. Its light now pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost conscious, almost alive, cutting through the storm with sinister precision. The skeletal figure in the lantern room stood impossibly tall, its shadow stretching across the fog and water. Its gaze seemed to pierce the heart of every man on deck. Collins gripped a railing, pale-faced. "Captain, the water, it's alive." Lightning illuminated the horror beneath. Ghostly forms of sailors from centuries past, twisted and malformed, drifted alongside shattered hulls and debris. They moved with purpose, circling the ardent voyager as if herded by the very pulse of the lighthouse. Their hollow eyes stared upward, mouths frozen in silent screams. Ortega whispered, trembling, "It's controlling them, the dead, the wreckage, it's alive." Ward did not speak. He gripped the wheel tightly, his mind racing. He knew centuries of sailors had been claimed by this lighthouse. And now it had turned its attention to them. Suddenly, a colossal shadow rose beneath the waves. It was impossible to discern its exact shape, but its sheer size dwarfed the ardent voyager. It moved with intelligent intent, herding wreckage and spectral sailors in a terrifying display of control. The crew froze, paralyzed with horror. Collins gasped, "Captain, it's hurting us, it's like prey." Ward tightened his jaw. "We hold steady. We survive this storm." The lighthouse pulsed faster. The figure in the lantern room raised both skeletal arms, and the storm obeyed as if alive. Waves twisted into impossible spirals, the wind roared in unnatural rhythms, and the ship pitched dangerously, nearly tipping. The bell from the wreckage tolled hollow and slow, echoing through the deck and into the crew's very bones. Each chime seemed to bind them to the lighthouse, synchronizing with the pulsing light. The shadow beneath the waves surged closer. The ghostly sailors reached higher, arms outstretched, faces twisted in eternal terror. They were drawn by the light, circling the ardent voyager, testing its crew, waiting for a misstep. Ward felt the pressure in his chest, the weight of centuries pressing down. The storm, the lighthouse, the water, and the dead were all one entity, watching, testing, judging. One false move, one hesitation, and the ardent voyager would be claimed like the countless ships before it. Lightning split the sky. The figure in the lantern room was fully visible, impossibly thin and tall, its shadow merging with the waves. The pulse of the lighthouse quickened, blinding, almost like a heartbeat, controlling the storm and the ocean itself. Collins whispered, voice trembling, "It's testing us, all the others, they failed, we're next." Ward's eyes narrowed. "We survive. No mistakes. Hold your posts." The ardent voyager surged forward, engines roaring, straining against the supernatural pull of the sea. The wreckage formed a swirling vortex, circling the ship, herded by the shadow beneath. Ghostly sailors reached for the living, following the rhythm of the lighthouse. The storm moved as one, responding to the tower's pulse. Another monstrous wave hit the ship, sweeping sailors across the deck. Crates and ropes flew. Below deck, men screamed and prayed. The bell tolled again, resonating in perfect sync with the lighthouse's heartbeat. Ward could feel it, the lighthouse, The storm, the water, the dead, they were all one, an ancient intelligence testing their courage, their skill, their will to survive. The ardent voyager pitched violently once more. The shadow beneath the waves circled tighter, the ghostly forms reaching closer, the wreckage swirling faster. The pulse of the lighthouse accelerated, brighter and blinding. The skeletal figure in the lantern room raised both arms, commanding the elements like a dark god. Collins whispered, "It wants us, all of us." Ward swallowed hard. "Then we survive. Every second counts. We do not falter." The storm raged. The waves towered. The water boiled with spectral forms. The lighthouse pulsed, unyielding. The shadow beneath the waves circled. The wreckage twisted in impossible patterns. And through it all, the ardent voyager fought to survive, trapped in a supernatural tempest, older than the sea itself, alive with the dead, guided by the pulse of a phantom lighthouse. The ardent voyager lurched violently as the storm reached its crescendo. Waves towered above the deck like walls of liquid night, smashing down with deafening force. Rain lashed against the sailors, freezing their faces, soaking their uniforms, and soaking their very spirits in cold terror. The wind howled, carrying whispers that sounded like centuries of lost sailors calling out in agony. Captain Ward's gaze never left the lighthouse. Its light pulsed faster, brighter, almost breathing, almost alive. The skeletal figure in the lantern room moved with a deliberate, haunting rhythm, shadow stretching impossibly across the waves and fog. Every pulse seemed to control the storm, the sea, and even the minds of the crew. Collins clutched the railing, white-knuckled. "Captain, look at the water." Lightning split the sky. Beneath the surface, the dead moved. Ghostly sailors, twisted and warped, drifted among wreckage from centuries past. Arms outstretched, hollow eyes fixed on the ardent voyager. The water pulsed unnaturally, circling the ship in perfect synchronization with the lighthouse's heartbeat. Ortega stammered, It's controlling them, the dead, the wreckage, it's alive." Ward gritted his teeth. "Hold her steady. We survived this storm." Suddenly, a massive shadow surged beneath the waves. It was impossible to see clearly, but its size dwarfed the ardent voyager. It twisted and undulated with deliberate intelligence, herding ghostly wreckage and spectral sailors toward the ship. The crew froze, paralyzed with fear. Collins gasped, "It's like a predator, guiding us." Ward tightened his grip. "Do not falter. Keep her steady." The lighthouse pulsed faster. The skeletal figure in the lantern room raised both arms. The storm obeyed as if it were alive. Waves formed impossible spirals, the wind tore across the deck with violent purpose, and the ship pitched dangerously, threatening to capsize. The bell from the wreckage tolled hollow, echoing through the hull, synchronized with the lighthouse. Each toll seemed to bind the ship and its crew to the will of the tower, tugging at their souls with invisible hands. The shadow beneath the waves surged closer. Ghostly sailors rose higher, arms reaching, faces twisted in eternal terror. They were drawn by the pulsing light, circling tighter, herding the living as prey. Ward felt centuries of weight pressing down on him. The lighthouse, the storm, the water, and the dead were a single entity, testing their resolve. One false move, one hesitation, and the ardent voyager would be claimed, joining the countless ships trapped beneath its light. Lightning flashed again. The figure in the lantern room fully revealed itself, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, its skeletal frame commanding both the storm and the water. The pulse quickened, blinding and relentless. The dead beneath the waves twisted, circling faster, guided by the unseen force. Collins whispered, trembling, "It's, all of it, alive, it wants us." Ward's eyes narrowed. "Then we survive. We do not falter." The ardent voyager surged forward, engines straining against the supernatural pull. The ghostly wreckage formed a swirling vortex around the ship. The spectral sailors reached higher, grasping, drawn by the light, synchronized with the pulse of the lighthouse. Another monstrous wave slammed the deck. Sailors were thrown off balance, crates and equipment flying. Below deck, men screamed and prayed. The bell tolled again, every chime resonating with the lighthouse's heartbeat, tying the ship, crew, and storm together. Ward could feel it, the lighthouse, the storm, the water, the dead, they were one consciousness. Ancient. Patient. Unstoppable. Testing courage, skill, and will to survive. The ardent voyager pitched violently again. The shadow beneath the waves circled tighter. Ghostly forms rose, arms outstretched, swirling wreckage tighter. The lighthouse's pulse accelerated, blinding and punishing. The skeletal figure raised both arms, commanding the elements with godlike authority. Collins whispered, "It wants us, all of us." Ward swallowed hard. "Then we fight. We survive. Every second counts. No faltering." The storm raged. Waves towered. Water boiled with spectral forms. The lighthouse pulsed. The shadow circled. The wreckage twisted impossibly. And through it all, the ardent voyager fought to survive, caught in a supernatural tempest older than the sea itself, alive with the dead, and guided by the pulse of a phantom lighthouse that would not relent. The storm reached a terrifying peak. Waves slammed the ardent voyager like colossal fists, sending seawater surging across the deck in icy torrents. The wind screamed with unnatural intelligence, carrying whispers that seemed to echo the cries of sailors lost centuries ago. Every man on deck clung desperately to rails, ropes, anything that would prevent them from being swept into the abyss. Captain Ward's gaze remained fixed on the lighthouse. Its pulsing light was alive, a heartbeat that commanded the storm itself. The skeletal figure in the lantern room raised its arms in silent authority, shadow stretching over the waves like a dark specter reaching for the ship. Every pulse of the light seemed to twist the ocean, controlling every wave, every shadow beneath the water, every shred of wreckage circling them. Collins shouted over the roar of the storm, "Captain, the water. The wreckage, it's moving on its own." Lightning illuminated the nightmare below. Spectral sailors twisted and drifted among the shattered hulls of centuries-old wrecks. Their pale faces stared blankly at the crew, mouths frozen in eternal screams. Arms stretched upward, desperate and accusing, drawn toward the living by the lighthouse's pulse. Ortega trembled, voice barely audible, "It's alive. It controls the dead, the wreckage, even the sea." Ward tightened his grip on the wheel. "We survive this, or we join them." No hesitation. Beneath the waves, the shadow moved. Immense, ancient, and purposeful, it twisted around the wreckage, herding it like a predator circling prey. Its presence radiated a cold intelligence, an unyielding hunger. The ardent voyager lurched as if the ocean itself was trying to crush them against the lighthouse's base. Collins whispered, "It's testing us, like all the others, we're next." Ward's jaw hardened. "Hold her steady. We survive." The lighthouse pulsed faster. The skeletal figure in the lantern room raised both arms. The storm obeyed, waves rose into impossible spirals, wind tore across the deck like blades, rain hammered down relentlessly. The ardent voyager pitched violently, nearly capsizing. The bell from the wreckage tolled hollowly, echoing through the timbers, synchronized with the lighthouse's pulse. Every chime seemed to pull at their very souls, binding them to the will of the tower. The shadow beneath the waves surged closer. Ghostly sailors rose higher, circling, arms outstretched, reaching for the living. The wreckage twisted, drawn inexorably toward the ship. The pulse of the lighthouse quickened, blinding, relentless, forcing the crew to confront centuries of doom gathered here. Ward felt it in his bones. The lighthouse, the storm, the dead, and the water were all a single consciousness, testing their courage, their skill, their will. One false move, One lapse in focus, and the ardent voyager would be claimed, joining the fleet of the lost. Lightning revealed the skeletal figure fully. It was impossibly tall, impossibly thin, commanding both storm and sea. The dead beneath the waves twisted and rose, synchronized with the lighthouse. The vortex of wreckage tightened around the ship, swirling like a living cage. Collins whispered, terrified, "It wants us, all of us." Ward's voice was firm, almost defiant, "Then we survive. Every second counts. No faltering." The ship surged forward. The engines screamed, straining against the supernatural pull. The ghostly sailors rose higher, reaching, grasping, circling tighter, drawn by the lighthouse's pulse. Waves crashed over the deck, sweeping sailors off their feet. Crates, ropes, and equipment flew across the wet, trembling planks. Below deck, the crew screamed, prayed, and clung to anything stable. The bell tolled again, hollow and echoing, synchronized with the lighthouse, binding the living to its rhythm. The shadow beneath the waves moved faster now, circling, twisting, hurting them like prey. The wreckage spun in impossible patterns. The storm obeyed the lighthouse entirely. The ardent voyager was trapped in a living, sentient tempest, older than the sea itself, alive with the dead, and guided by a force beyond comprehension. Collins gasped, voice trembling, It's controlling everything, we're caught, like all the others." Ward clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the tower. "We survive. Or we die trying." Another monstrous wave hit. The deck tilted violently. The spectral hands of the dead reached higher, almost touching the sailors. The shadow beneath the waves circled tighter, intelligent and relentless. The lighthouse pulsed faster, blindingly, each beat a heartbeat of death. And the ardent voyager struggled onward, caught in the center of a supernatural storm, commanded by a phantom lighthouse, haunted by centuries of the dead, as the pulse of the light beat like an eternal, merciless heart. The ardent voyager trembled violently as another monstrous wave struck, tossing men and crates across the deck. Rain lashed like needles, wind screamed like a living beast, and the hollow wails of the dead echoed across the storm. Every sailor felt it, the air, the water, the storm itself were alive and watching. Captain Ward's eyes never left the lighthouse. Its pulsing light now seemed to reach into the minds of the crew, controlling the storm, the waves, and the very hearts of the living. The skeletal figure in the lantern room raised both arms, commanding the elements like a god of the deep, its shadow stretching impossibly across the churning ocean. Collins screamed over the roar, "Captain, the shadow, it's rising, it's enormous." Lightning illuminated the horror beneath, massive shapes twisting beneath the waves, spectral sailors from centuries past, wreckage circling the ship like a predator's teeth. The water pulsed unnaturally, hurting the ardent voyager toward the lighthouse, guiding the living like prey. Ortega stammered, It's alive, the dead, the water, everything." Ward's grip on the wheel tightened. "We survive this, or we die with them. No mistakes." The shadow surged higher, massive, intelligent, twisting beneath the waves. It herded the ghostly wreckage closer, circling the ship with a predator's patience. The dead rose higher, arms outstretched, hollow eyes focused on the living crew. The lighthouse's pulse quickened, blindingly bright, like a heartbeat that forced the storm to obey. The skeletal figure's arms rose higher, commanding the tempest. Waves formed impossible spirals, tossing sailors across the deck. The bell from the wreckage tolled hollowly, echoing in sync with the light, binding the ship and crew to the tower's supernatural will. Collins gasped, voice trembling, It wants us, all of us." Ward swallowed hard, voice steady, "Then we fight. We survive. Every second counts." Another wave slammed down. Deck tilted dangerously. Crates, ropes, and barrels were thrown across the slippery planks. Below deck, men screamed, clinging to anything stable. The ghostly sailors reached higher, circling closer, synchronized with the pulse of the lighthouse. The shadow beneath the waves surged directly under the hull, massive and intelligent, as if testing the ship's strength, herding it like prey toward the lighthouse's base. The ardent voyager groaned under the pressure, timbers creaking as if alive. Lightning split the sky. The skeletal figure in the lantern room was fully visible, impossibly tall, commanding storm, sea, and dead alike. Its pulse of light grew faster, brighter, almost painful, forcing every man to the edge of madness. Collins whispered, "We're trapped, it's controlling everything." Ward's jaw tightened. "We survive. Or we die trying." The storm roared. Waves rose higher. Water boiled with spectral forms. The lighthouse pulsed. The shadows circled. The wreckage swirled like a living cage. The ardent voyager was caught in a supernatural tempest, alive with the dead, older than the sea itself. Then, in a terrifying moment, the shadow beneath the waves surged upward, water erupting like a black volcano. The spectral sailors cried out silently, swirling in the vortex. For the first time, the crew saw it, a massive, nightmarish entity, larger than any whale, with eyes that glowed like coals beneath the water. Its tentacle-like appendages reached toward the ship, hurting wreckage, scraping against the hull. Ortega screamed, "Captain, it's touching us." Ward braced himself, shouting orders. "Hold her steady. Do not falter. Every man to their post." The storm obeyed the lighthouse entirely. The ardent voyager was surrounded by ghostly wreckage, spectral sailors, and the massive shadow beneath the waves. Each pulse of the lighthouse sent tremors through the deck, through the hull, through the very souls of the crew. The skeletal figure in the lantern room raised both arms higher, as if commanding all of creation. Lightning revealed glimpses of the enormous entity below, limbs twisting, massive jaws opening beneath the waves, hurting the ship like a living predator. Collins whispered, voice trembling, It wants us, it's alive, every wave, every ghost, every beam." Ward's voice rang out over the chaos, steady and commanding, "We survive. Or we die trying. Hold on." The ardent voyager pitched violently, nearly capsizing. Waves smashed over the deck, sweeping sailors into the raging sea. Crates, ropes, and debris flew. Ghostly hands reached higher from the water, almost touching the living. The lighthouse pulsed faster, brighter, forcing the storm, the waves, and the dead into a terrifying rhythm. The shadow beneath the waves circled tighter. The wreckage spiraled in impossible patterns. And through it all, the ardent voyager fought for life, caught in a supernatural maelstrom, alive with centuries of the dead, guided by the merciless pulse of a phantom lighthouse. The ardent voyager was caught in the eye of the supernatural storm, waves towering above like walls of liquid night. Rain lashed and wind screamed, yet the lighthouse's pulse dominated everything: storm, sea, and the dead. The massive shadow beneath the waves surged upward. Water erupted violently, revealing glimpses of the entity, enormous, dark, with glowing eyes, limbs twisting like tentacles of pure night. Ghostly sailors and wreckage were drawn into its vortex, circling the ardent voyager like trapped prey. Captain Ward gritted his teeth, eyes locked on the skeletal figure in the lantern room. Its arms raised, commanding the storm. Every pulse of light seemed to weigh on the crew's hearts, demanding surrender, demanding obedience. "Hold steady. Do not falter." Ward shouted, his voice cutting through the roar. "We survive." A colossal wave slammed into the deck, sweeping Collins and Ortega off their feet. Ward lunged, grabbing ropes, pulling them back aboard. The spectral hands of the dead reached higher, almost touching the living, but the ardent voyager pressed forward, engines roaring, fighting against the pull of the sea. The shadows circled closer, herding the ship toward the lighthouse's base. The skeletal figure's pulse accelerated, blindingly bright, each heartbeat synchronized with the storm, the waves, and the spectral sailors. It was testing their courage, their will, their very souls. Ward took a deep breath. We survived this, together. He steered the ship directly toward the lighthouse, ignoring the terror around him. The storm rose higher, waves twisted impossibly, debris and ghostly forms assaulted the deck, but Ward did not waver. Collins shouted, "We're going to hit it." Ward held firm. The ardent Voyager crashed through the final wall of spectral wreckage, plunging directly toward the lighthouse. The pulse of light flared, brighter than ever. The shadow surged, its massive limbs reaching, but the crew's defiance, their determination, pushed against the supernatural force. In that moment, lightning struck the tower. The skeletal figure screamed silently, a soundless echo through the storm. The entity beneath the waves recoiled, twisting, then slowly began to retreat. The vortex of wreckage unraveled, spectral sailors dissipating into mist. The storm began to calm. Waves still thrashed, rain still fell, but the supernatural pressure lifted. The lighthouse's pulse dimmed, flickered, then faded to a dull glow. The shadow beneath the waves sank back into the depths, leaving the ardent Voyager battered but afloat. Ward exhaled, voice shaking but firm. We survived. The crew clung to the deck, drenched and trembling, staring at the lighthouse, which now seemed just an ordinary tower in the fog. Yet every man aboard knew the truth, it was still alive, patient, waiting. The ardent Voyager had survived, for now, but the lighthouse's pulse would remain in their minds forever. Collins whispered, Did we really escape it? Ward looked out at the calm sea, the fog lingering. We escaped tonight, but it's out there. Watching. Waiting. And someday, it will test another crew. The ardent Voyager sailed onward, battered but alive, the spectral echoes of the lighthouse lingering in the mist behind them. The ocean returned to its usual rhythm, yet the memory of that night, the pulse, the shadow, the dead, it would never leave them. And far on the horizon, the faint glow of the lighthouse pulsed once more, a heartbeat in the darkness, eternal and unyielding.